This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. On today's show, journalist Michael Grunwald has looked at President Obama's much-criticized stimulus program and discovered that it stopped an economic death spiral. Professor Nicholas Cafardi is an expert on civil and canon law who says President Obama is more pro-life than Mitt Romney. And Bill Press talks with Colorado Congresswoman Diana DeGette the day after the Denver presidential debate. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Time Magazine's senior national correspondent Michael Grunwald has written a book comparing the Obama administration's stimulus program to FDR's New Deal. Why hasn't the public understood how effective that stimulus was? Grunwald says it's partly because of the news media, but also because of incredible Republican distortions of the record. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Michael Grunwald is Time Magazine's senior national correspondent. He's the author of the new book, The New Deal, The Hidden Story of Change in the Obama Era. Mike Grunwald, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
Now, in your new book, The New Deal, you argue President Obama's stimulus program has produced substantial positive results. Yet, that stimulus seems to be a political albatross around the president's neck. Why the disconnect?
Well, you got that right. I mean, a year after the stimulus passed, the percentage of Americans who believed it had created any jobs was lower than the percentage of Americans who believed Elvis was alive. As you said, my book it's a book about change, and the stimulus had loads of it. It prevented a depression and ended a recession, and it also really was a huge down payment on President Obama's campaign agenda for energy, education, healthcare, and really restructuring the economy through infrastructure and middle-class tax cuts and research. Why don't people know that? Well, it's partly because of incredible Republican distortion that has made this thing sound like $800 billion worth of levitating trains to Disneyland and mob museums and sod on the mall and all kinds of nonsense that's not in the actual stimulus. And I do tell the story of how Republicans decided that they devised their strategy of no before Obama even took office. But then Democrats didn't really defend it. They mostly complained that it was too small or it was too many tax cuts or not shovel-ready enough. And President Obama really had some trouble getting his message straight on this. I sort of go into that in detail in the book. Then you've got the media stinks and really blew the story as badly as they blew the run-up to the war in Iraq. They're lazy. They don't like public policy. And when they like doing he said, she said stories, and when you've got Republicans saying it's a mess and Democrats sort of saying it's a mess for different reasons, it was very easy for them to just write it off as a $800 billion joke. But finally, you've also got this problem of this jobs bill that passed at a time where jobs were hemorrhaging. I mean, the economy was crashing at a 9% annual rate when Obama took office. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month. We passed the stimulus, and it's the biggest jobs improvement in 30 years, but it improved from absolutely hideous to just bad. And it's just kind of hard to sell, hey, look, things are bad, but we made things a little better. So I think this jobs bill just got a bad reputation from the start.
Yeah. Well, given that Republicans sing the note or the one note of tax cutting, why haven't the Democrats been talking about the tax cuts that were in fact contained in the stimulus bill?
Yeah, it cut tax. There were $300 billion in tax cuts. It cut taxes for more than 95% of the country, and less than 10% of the country is aware of it. I tell a story that's going to make Democratic heads explode in the book of how, people remember in the Bush stimulus in 2008, they just sent everybody checks. But Obama's economists, they know the behavioral studies that show that when you get a check like that, you're more likely to save it and put it in the bank instead of spending it and stimulating the economy. So they had the bright idea of just leaking it out a few dollars a week into people's paychecks through reduced withholding, which is great because then you're less likely to notice it and more likely to spend it. But you're less likely to notice it. So Rahm Emanuel was running around saying, hey, we're denying ourselves an Ed McMahon moment, right? That squeal of Publishers Clearinghouse pleasure when you get your check in the mail from Barack. And I quote Ron Klain, who was another senior advisor in the White House, saying, at the time we thought that if we just got the policy right and got results, the politics would take care of itself. But in retrospect, it was just stupid. It was like, sending a romantic interest flowers without signing the note.
I have not been very impressed with the marketing, if you will, of the accomplishments of the administration, and there are plenty. I mean, as you point out in the book, I mean, there's a lot to be happy about right now, even as bad as things continue to be. But and one of the different...
Well, I do try to remind people that this black guy whose middle name is Hussein and got himself elected president, he probably didn't become a complete political idiot on January 20th, 2009. There are all kinds of messaging problems, and there were some real messaging fights inside the White House. But he did have a tough sell, and even Keynesian stimulus is a tough sell, right?
Yeah.
I mean, after you've had this horrible crisis that's created by banks spending money they didn't have and homeowners taking out loans they couldn't afford, and you've just thrown $700 billion to bail out Wall Street. And then Obama comes in and says we need to borrow another $800 billion and throw it into the economy, and that's going to fix things at a time when families and businesses are tightening their belts. I mean, every economist agrees that it's the way to go, and they would say that it's the general consensus that it increased GDP between 2 and 4%, which is the difference between contraction and growth. But it's still a tough sell, right? It's not intuitive. Oh, great, the government's spending lots of money.
Right. Well, but why they wait 3 years to have the President Clinton come up and tell everybody, hey, look, nobody could have fixed this in 4 years? I mean, I think they should have been drumming that because you knew back then that this was a deeper hole than we'd ever been in.
Right. But, they did say some of that, but there were some legitimate things they didn't know. I mean, the official numbers for the fourth quarter of 2008 were that the economy had declined at a negative 3.8% rate, which is disastrous, but it was later revised to negative 8.9%, which is a depression. Yeah. And nobody knew things were that bad. And just imagine imagine right now where we're plodding along at 1.5% growth, and suddenly and we found out 6 months later that in fact it was 6.5%. Instead, we were in an incredible boom. It's a huge, vast gap between how bad things people thought it was and how bad things actually were.
Yeah.
So, which is not to make excuses, but look, they were afraid at that time. They were really afraid that if they talked down the economy too much, it could just kill consumer confidence, and that could be the trigger that caused the depression. I don't want to make too many excuses for them, but look, this was a tough thing to message. The financial earthquake had hit, but the economic tsunami had not reached the shore.
Yeah.
I quote Larry Summers talking about how FDR was lucky. He had 3 years of depression under Hoover before he took office. Everybody knew it was Hoover's depression.
Right. We're speaking with Michael Grunwald, Time Magazine's senior national correspondent, author of the new book, The New Deal, The Hidden Story of Change in the Obama Era. And, Mike, obviously one of the difficulties for Democrats is that things aren't back to where they had been, but where would the economy have been if Republicans had succeeded in blocking the 2009 stimulus?
Well, I think, you could see that we were on this horrible trajectory. And, would we have gotten 25% unemployment? Would it have just gone to 15%? That's hard to know. But we were in a death spiral, and there's no question that the Recovery Act stopped that. The best example would be aid to states, where there was, about $200 billion worth of, we just essentially state bailouts so that they didn't have to lay off their teachers and cops and didn't have to slash their Medicaid for the disabled and the poor and other services. And you saw at a time when there were massive millions of layoffs planned, and every one of those public employees would have, when you lose your job, you stop spending money at the local grocery store, and then the local grocery store lays off its employees and they stop spending money, and so on and so forth. By putting a floor under that, you really did stop the disaster. And then moving forward, you can see where Republicans who initially supported stimulus, but once it became Obama's stimulus, decided that they liked austerity better, and were pushing very hard for austerity. You've seen what's happened in countries like Great Britain and Spain that have adopted essentially the kind of Republican proposals for austerity. They've lapsed back into double-dip recessions, which, as rough as our economy has been, we haven't gone backwards. We've been going forward very slowly.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as you pointed out, it's hard to find an economist that doesn't think the stimulus is the right thing to do. So it probably isn't the best campaign slogan to say things could have been worse, but that is the point of your book, right?
Well, it's part of it. Look, Mitt Romney has been asking, or do you feel, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Which I think is a really dumb thing for him to be asking, because it's a reminder of what things were like 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. He'd probably be better to ask, hey, how you doing? But so I do think, there is part of the Obama case has to be, things could have been worse. And essentially the kind of George Bush / Mitt Romney policies are what made it worse. At the same time, though, part of what my book argues, and look, it's not just an argument. The book is a story, and I hope people read it and enjoy it just to learn about the president and his policies and his approach to politics and his enemies and the sort of screwiness of Washington. But part of the implicit argument is that in some ways things really are better, that we've doubled renewable energy in this country, that solar has increased more than 600%, that we've jump-started the smart grid, that we've created a new battery industry for electric vehicles almost entirely from scratch, that we've tripled electronic medical records in this country so that by 2016, 2017, every American will have one. So that instead of just having online dating and online banking, we can have online medicine too. That race to the top is starting to be implemented. That there was a homelessness prevention program that kept 1.2 million people off the streets. And if half of them had ended up homeless instead, the homeless population would have doubled. But instead, homelessness actually declined during the worst recession since the Great Depression. That after experts predicted that 5 to 7% of this thing would be lost to fraud, the actual numbers so far have been 0.001%. That it really is the most transparent and accountable government money that's ever been spent. I think there are a lot of good news stories, not just things could have been worse stories, but things have actually changed stories that people will be surprised by.
I'd like to hear more of that from the Democratic leadership right now, and give the president the support that he deserves as far as that goes.
It's funny. The president, I don't know if he's read the book, but he did read a piece I wrote about the book in the Washington Post. And in that day, he was giving some of his political advisors a hard time, and he was like threatening to start talking about the stimulus in his stump speech. And of course, his advisors were like, "No, don't anything but that." They do feel like kind of the cake is baked, and that there's no real. There's no real upside for them to be kind of dancing in the end zone at a time when people are hurting.
Sure.
That said, you do start to hear them at least talk about how they've doubled renewable energy, wind and solar, how they've cut taxes for 95% of the country, how they've extended unemployment benefits. So there is at least a little bit of talking about their record.
So safe to say, in your book, not only was the stimulus not ineffective, but actually a big deal, as well as, perhaps the first New Deal.
Yeah, it really is. Look, it's a different thing, right? I didn't call the book Another New Deal. This didn't create vast federal agencies with millions of government workers. Didn't create new entitlements like Social Security and deposit insurance. It didn't create big government because FDR has already done that. But it is going to create icons like the New Deal with the world's largest wind plant and the half dozen of the world's largest solar plants and this new battery industry and an eco-friendly new Coast Guard headquarters. And instead of building a Grand Coulee Dam, you've got America's largest dam removal project on the Elwha River. But really the main legacy, I think, is going to be change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what the whole campaign was about 4 years ago too. Mike Grunwald, Time Magazine's senior national correspondent, the author of the new book, The New Deal, The Hidden Story of Change in the Obama Era. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
All right, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
We appreciate your time. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Professor Nicholas Cafardi of Duquesne University is an expert on Catholic law who makes a distinction between the Church's social gospel and the Republican gospel of you're on your own, the gospel of Ayn Rand. But right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Hail, hail, the GOP gang's all here. So let us now welcome Representative Todd Akin back into the fold. Todd, the present Republican nominee for a Missouri U.S. Senate seat, was coldly cast aside by his own partisan flock just a few weeks ago because he's truly goofy. He's the legitimate rape guy who put forth a theory of voodoo science that would prevent even pregnant rape victims from being allowed abortions. If a woman endures a, quote, legitimate rape, explained this member of, believe it or not, the U.S. House Science Committee, her body would magically generate some sort of occult hormone that would prevent her from becoming pregnant. Thus, spake Todd, any woman who gets pregnant from an unwanted sexual encounter, even a violent one forced upon her, has not experienced a legitimate rape and must bear the rapist's child. Oh, cried every GOP politico from Mitt Romney to the county dog catcher, this is too weird even for us, so Todd must resign as our party's nominee, forthwith. Only he didn't. And guess what? The moral purists who so loudly reviled Akin a few weeks ago are now hugging him, tucking campaign checks in his sordid coat pockets and hoping he'll win so they and he can take over the U.S. Senate. What's a little rape compared to political expediency? But whoops, Todd wasn't through with his goofiness binge. Now a video has surfaced in which Mr. Legitimate Rape Man doubles as Mr. Legitimate Discrimination Man. Asked at a public meeting why a woman shouldn't get equal pay for doing the same work as a man, the guy who would be senator explains on video that free enterprise means that corporations are free to discriminate in what they pay women. This is Jim Hightower saying, keep talking, Todd. We're all listening.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. An expert on Catholic law and the co-chair of Catholics for Obama says the president is more pro-life than Mitt Romney because abortions are more likely when aid is cut to poor women. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Nicholas P. Cafardi is a civil and canon lawyer and a professor and former dean at Duquesne University School of Law in Pittsburgh. He is editor of Voting and Holiness, Catholic Perspectives on Political Participation, published by Paulist Press. Professor Cafardi recently became a co-chair of Catholics for Obama. Professor Cafardi, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
You're welcome.
Now, you wrote a provocative article recently arguing that President Obama is more pro-life than Mitt Romney. Given the president's lifelong pro-choice stance, how can you make such a startling claim?
I can make that claim because of what President Obama has done to drive down the number of abortions in this country. You know, it's not enough simply to say I'm I'm pro-life, and then pretty much not do anything about it, which has been the Republicans' position for so very long. I think we need to judge people more by their actions than by their words, and certainly the actions of the president, especially in the Affordable Care Act, and all of the assistance that Affordable Care Act provides to pregnant women, to women with young families. The clear result of the Affordable Care Act will be to drive down the number of abortions in America. And if we're interested more in results than we are interested in rhetoric, we're going to get better pro-life results with the Obama program, as opposed to the Romney program, which is basically say I'm pro-life and then do nothing about it, or worse yet, do things that make abortions much more likely in the United States. Because if we take away the support for pregnant women that's provided in the Affordable Care Act, and Romney has said he wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act, we're actually going to probably be driving more poor women to abortions.
So you're basically saying that the Affordable Care Act will prevent abortions, and the Romney-Ryan attempt to defund Planned Parenthood and other social programs will create more pregnancies and more abortions?
Well, sure, isn't that just common sense? We know that 3 out of 4 abortions in the United States are economic abortions. They're abortions because the woman involved has nowhere to turn, no help. The man who's got her in this situation is long gone. She's by herself, can't face bringing another child into the world, has the regrettable, tragic choice of deciding what to do in that situation. If that woman knows that there is prenatal care for her while she is pregnant, if she knows that there's going to be the WIC program to provide food for that child once the child's born, if she knows that there's still going to be some kind of subsidized housing, it's just much more likely that she's going to decide to have that child and not have an abortion. Whereas if we defund or repeal the Affordable Care Act, if we defund any aid to Planned Parenthood, which, by the way, helps provide prenatal care, among other things, it just seems that it's common sense that we're going to have more abortions.
Mm-hmm.
With the Republican program.
Right. Yeah, we're speaking with Nicholas Cafardi, civil and canon lawyer, professor, and former dean at Duquesne University School of Law in Pittsburgh. He's editor of Voting and Holiness, Catholic Perspectives on Political Participation. Opponents of your view call you a liar and claim that Obama is in favor of infanticide. Obviously, there are some strong feelings surrounding the issue of abortion, but how would you answer the attacks that say it is impossible to be a pro-life Catholic yet support a pro-choice political candidate?
My response is something I've already said. We need to focus more on results than we focus on rhetoric. Saying that the president is in favor of infanticide, first of all, is simply not true. It's a nice way to smear him. But why are religious people choosing to smear those with whom they disagree? I mean, it seems that would be the last thing that the Lord would want, huh? I mean, demonizing opposition doesn't help solve problems. We live in a pluralistic democracy. There are people who think that abortion, while always a tragedy, ought not to be made illegal. That's what the president has said. He's not in favor of criminalizing abortion. That's hardly infanticide. And by the way, that isn't even pro-abortion. That's simply saying he doesn't want to criminalize the procedure. So characterizing that as infanticide, characterizing that as pro-abortion, is simply demonizing the other side without trying to deal with it. In a democracy, we need to deal with the other side. And this is something where I think Catholics could really teach the nation if we ever got serious about talking about the real ways to deal with abortion. Simply saying we want to make abortion illegal, or simply saying we want to overturn Roe v. Wade, that's not going to reduce the number of abortions by 1% in this country.
Mm-hmm. In fact, it would be taking us backwards, would it not?
Well, in countries where abortion is illegal, the abortion rate is higher than in countries where it's not illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the countries where it's not illegal, there is support for that pregnant woman. There's support for that young family.
Mm-hmm.
In the countries of Western Europe, where medicine is more or less socialized, and where abortion is not illegal, they've got much lower abortion rates than actually some very Catholic countries where abortion is illegal, but there's absolutely no support for that woman coming from public funds. So again, we need to have a discussion without demonizing the other side on what are we really about here. If we're really about eliminating abortions, shouldn't we look at what works?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's you made the reference earlier. Hey, it's common sense, and it sure seems that way to me. Why is it so difficult to get this message across? And why are people listening to the demonizing? I mean, because it seems pretty clear to me.
I think they're listening to the demonizing because they're not thinking. It's unfortunate, but we run our political campaigns in America now with sound bites and not with real analytical thought. And the Republicans have been very crafty here. I mean, they've managed to create certain wedge issues to drive sectors of the Democratic Party, the old Democratic coalition, away from the party. And the Roe v. Wade, in spite of the fact that historically Roe v. Wade was a decision of a primarily Republican court,
right?
They have somehow made the repeal of Roe v. Wade the only way to deal with abortion. The only way. There is no other way. And so, I think Roe v. Wade was the best thing that happened to the Republican Party because it gave them a wedge issue that they could use to help segment the old Democratic coalition, primarily the working class Catholics who had always voted Democrat. Now these people, because they've been convinced that the Republicans are the pro-life party, despite all facts to the contrary, they've bought that. They've bought that soundbite, and they're literally going to the polls and voting against their own economic self-interest, because they think the Republicans are going to do something about abortion.
You alluded to this a second ago. And since the days of John F. Kennedy, the country's first and only Catholic president, the Catholic vote has steadily moved from Democrat to Republican. How do you account for it, and what can President Obama do to regain those voters?
Well, I think I account for it with what I just said. I think the Republicans have through very well stage managed tactics, have managed to create wedge issues that have segmented the old Democratic coalition and have basically working class Catholic Democrats voting for a pie in the sky. The idea that the Republicans would ever make abortion illegal, they've had chances. They've never delivered, and I don't think they intend to because this wedge issue works for them. And as a result, those people have moved away. How do we get them back? I think we get them back by addressing their needs, by addressing their concerns, by explaining how you can be opposed to making abortion illegal, but that doesn't make you pro-abortion. Because if you are at the same time doing everything you possibly can to drive down the likelihood that a woman will choose that terrible alternative, then you're not a pro-abortion candidate. You, in fact, are a pro-life candidate because you are doing everything that you possibly can to make life more likely.
Again, we're speaking with Nicholas Cafardi, professor, former dean at Duquesne University School of Law in Pittsburgh, editor of Voting and Holiness, Catholic Perspectives on Political Participation. Before we let you go, how do conservative Catholics, who are presumably motivated by their religious views, respond to church teachings that are generally known as the social gospel? Who's right, the Catholic right or the Catholic left?
Well, again, the social gospel is the gospel. I don't even like using the word social. The Lord said very clearly in Matthew that we're going to be judged at the end of time by how we took care of the poorest among us. Mm-hmm. And whenever we see a Republican platform that's going to gut Medicare, gut Medicaid, take away the current support that exists right now for pregnant women, take away student loans, take away student aid, and do all of this by on the backs of the poor, while at the same time reducing the taxes on the wealthy. That's not taking care of the least of us. As a matter of fact, it's the exact opposite. It's persecuting the least of us so that we can benefit those who really don't even need the help. They've just got it so wrong. I mean, the Ryan budget is just so wrong on Catholic issues. The gospel of you're on your own is the gospel of Ayn Rand. It's not the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we can say social gospel, but it's really the gospel. We're going to be judged at the end of time by how we took care of the least among us. And yes, that's an individual duty, but it's also a duty of society, because some of the problems of poverty are so inbred, they are so structural in our democracy, that it takes a social solution beyond simply an individual acts of charity towards these people.
Okay. Nicholas Cafardi, civil and canon lawyer, professor and former dean at Duquesne University School of Law in Pittsburgh, editor of Voting and Holiness, Catholic Perspectives on Political Participation, and also co-chair of Catholics for Obama. Professor Cafardi, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
You're welcome.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press interviews Congresswoman Diana DeGette on the day after the first presidential debate in her home state of Colorado.
The big first presidential debate held in Denver last night. The Full Court Press brought to you today by the Communication Workers of America, the good men and women of the CWA. Under President Larry Cohen, the Union for the Information Age, you bet, and you can find out more about their good work at cwa-union.org. When we were down in Charlotte at the Democratic National Convention, it was fun to welcome to Radio Row Congresswoman Diana DeGette from Colorado. She's back in our home state last night, or this morning rather, was there last night as well. She's Chief Deputy Whip among Democrats in the House of Representatives, and joining us on our newsline this morning. Congresswoman, good to have you with us again.
Good morning, Bill. Good to be with you, too.
Were you in the hall last night?
I was.
For the debate? Yes?
Yes, I was there.
And what was the reaction after the debate among Obama supporters?
Well, Governor Romney has spent months preparing for this debate. He came out swinging. He was quite aggressive. But for me, as I sat there in the hall, what came across very clearly, he was aggressive and bombastic, but he didn't add any clarity to his ideas. In fact, he doubled down on some of his very bad concepts from before, like saying somehow he's going to reduce the deficit and balance the budget, but he's not going to do anything on the revenue side. He's not going to increase taxes for the very wealthy people making over $250,000. And when the president kept pressing him on how's that going to happen, again, Governor Romney was a little bit fuzzy on the details. And I think when the dust settles, people will realize that the president was explaining what we've done the last 4 years to stabilize our economy and explaining what he's going to do the next 4 years to improve the situation for the middle class of America.
Well, there's no doubt the president made the point that Romney tries to have it both ways in the sense that he makes these flat statements, right, and then doesn't tell us what the details are. Like, for example, on the loopholes, you point out, right? Well, right. We're going to cut taxes, but there won't be any decrease in revenue because we're going to close loopholes. Well, what loopholes, we don't know. On health care, well, he's going to abolish it and replace it, but we don't know what he's going to replace it with. Then on Dodd-Frank, well, he's going to repeal it, but then we're not sure what he's and replace it. We're not sure what he's going to replace it with. And,
on
none of those points, you're right. Did Romney have anything to say?
Well, and the reason they don't have anything to say is because they know the voters won't like the hard facts. And here's a good example. In the Health Care Act, Governor Romney keeps saying, we're going to let people keep their kids on their insurance to 26. Well, we're going to let people with pre-existing conditions keep their insurance. Well, we're going to do this and that. Well, if you don't have everybody enrolled in insurance plans,
you can't do it.
You can't afford to do it. And that's what he realized when he was governor, in Massachusetts, because his plan required everybody to enroll in it. And, of course, he kind of glosses over that part.
Well, but the question for that at least I had is, there are so many watching last night, and I'm sure you had to have the same reaction in the hall. There were so many points where that Romney was clearly not telling the truth, clearly misstating either the president's position or the president's record. And the president, I thought, failed to rise to the occasion, failed to take an opportunity to point out that Mitt Romney was just, again, not telling the truth. I guess I could say telling a lie. But let's take the $716 billion cut from Medicare. Now, Romney made that point 3 times. And, Congresswoman, you and I both know it's baloney. All the independent fact checkers have said it's baloney. These are savings, they're not cuts to benefits, but the president never pointed that out. Why not?
Yeah, I was frustrated by that too.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, Bill.
I'm sure you were.
We were sitting there in the 4th or 5th row, wherever we were, and I was sitting next to one of our state legislators, and I'm going, okay, now, and I think what happened was the president was really focused on talking about his plans. And I think he probably didn't want to get into the trap of engaging with Mitt Romney on what's obviously really inaccurate and distorting of facts. But I think when we wake up this morning, we realize if you don't rebut those facts, then those facts are out there.
Right. I mean,
so I think you'll see. I think in the next 2 debates you'll see the president more aggressively go after these just blatant distortions.
Because you've got to do it. As a former debate coach, right, myself, and a judge for many different debates when I was coaching high school debate. If you make a charge and the other side doesn't shoot it down, that charge is on the table, right? That charge.
Well, Bill, I knew there was a reason I liked you, because I was a championship debater in high school and college.
Oh.
And I judged too for many years. And you're exactly right. If you're judging a debate and someone says, he's going to take $700 billion out of Medicare for seniors, then you better respond to that. And I think, again, the president was thinking, I need to get my program out there. I need to talk about how we're going to have everything on the table. We're going to have revenue from the very top taxpayers, et cetera. So he thought this is just so blatantly false. He didn't say that. And I think next time he'll realize he needs to confront those distortions head on.
Congresswoman, I'm trying to think back. I don't think my high school and your high school were in the same league, so I don't think we ever met each other on the debate squad, on the debate team.
Well, my high school was right across the highway from University of Denver. You could see my high school from where we were last night.
Well, mine was in Wilmington, Delaware, so
that's why.
On the same field. Now, let's talk about Colorado. Colorado is one of those swing states that we're paying so much attention to, and the president has certainly graced it with a lot of his time. How do things look in Colorado?
Well, it's been interesting. The last 6 months, the candidates have been steadily 1 to 2 points apart. President Obama's been one or 2 points up. In the last few weeks, that lead has really started to widen, and I heard that there was a poll yesterday that showed that there was a 5-point lead for the first time. So
for President Obama.
Yeah, well, no, I mean yes, for President Obama, and I think that the unaffiliated voters really have begun breaking his way. And so, we'll see the polls in the next few weeks. I've always thought it would tighten up again. But ultimately, when the voters look at some of those things that Governor Romney was saying, we're revenues off the table, we're going to repeal Obamacare, we're going to make Medicare into a voucher program.
Right.
All of those things, those are the same opinions and positions that he's been saying all along, and that's why President Obama continues to go up in the polls.
Congresswoman Diana DeGette, our guest here on this Thursday morning post-debate show of the Full Court Press. You can follow her at her website, House website, DeGette, DEGETTE, DeGette.house.gov. Do you have early voting in Colorado, Congresswoman?
Yes, we do have early voting.
Has it started?
Voter registration closes October 9th. So if any of your listeners are here in Colorado, they need to make sure they're registered by October 9th, and then early voting starts on October 16th.
I got it, right. So it started already in 34 states, but not there yet.
Not in Colorado.
So overall, building on your answer about Colorado, the key question about last night's debate is not to be cynical, but whether it will make any difference, right? Whether this is going to change the course of this campaign, as some Republicans are already claiming this morning. What do you think?
Well, I think those Republicans are having some very wishful thoughts because they're still stuck with their positions on all of these issues. One thing I wish had come up is the whole issue of women's health,
yes,
which really creates a stark difference between these candidates and which women are particularly concerned about. So I'm hoping that in one of the last two debates this issue will come up because women would like to hear what certainly they know where the president stands with the Affordable Care Act and all of those other good things. And they need to hear where Governor Romney stands.
But, that was another case, Congresswoman, where the president should have made that an issue last night and unfortunately failed to do so. Well, good news is we got two more debates coming up. Congresswoman, nice to see you when you're back in Washington. Come see us in the studio here. Love to see you again.
I certainly intend to. Thanks a lot, Bill.
All right, Congresswoman Diana DeGette does a great job in Colorado.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Michael Grunwald, Nicholas Cafardi, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For AmericasDemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to Americasdemocrats.org.